Hi everyone, we're ready to start again with our second artist in conversation. Feel free to take a seat. Thanks. Welcome to Art Atrium again for this artist in conversation between Jan Cleveringa and Miguel Olmo. This is Jan's first solo exhibition with Art Atrium, although we started representing him a bit before that. He's been involved in a couple of our group exhibitions over the last couple of years. But finally, we've got this fantastic exhibition here with us. To have this conversation with Jan, we have Miguel Olmo. Miguel is an artist himself, but at the same time, he's also the manager of Gallery Lane Cove, where he curates very interesting exhibitions. So I'd like you to welcome both Jan and also Miguel. Thank you.
Thanks, Simon. Thanks, Simon, and thanks, Jan, for the opportunity to have a quick chat. Before I start, I just want to pay my respects to the Indigenous inhabitants of the land on which we stand, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. When Jan and I were discussing what we were going to do today, we were both in the same idea that we didn't want to have a conversation between myself and Jan. We wanted to have a conversation with everybody. So, I mean, I know it feels like there's the great divide with the Ottoman in the middle and all the cameras and all that. But we want to keep it really casual. We want to make sure that you know, this is as engaging for you as it is for us. Because at the end of the day, Jan and I have known each other for quite a while. I met Jan's work before I met Jan. So I knew what he was doing for a long time before I even had a chance to meet him. And I think the first time I met him, he was dropping off an artwork for the Blackburn City Art Prize, and someone said, "Oh, that's Jan," and there seemed to be this aura about him. that you know, it was like, okay, oh, you know, can I be in that sphere? Can I be in that circle? And over the years that I've known Jan, I've realized that we have a lot in common. We both sort of have a similar trajectory in some regards. We've both worked in the welfare sector for a significant period of time. You know, we're both sort of approach our art making in a similar way. We've both sort of used reclaimed materials in a similar way. So there's a lot of similarities, but with all those similarities, there's a lot of differences. And we've had lots of chat over the years, lots and lots of chats. So when we were sort of deciding today's conversation, it wasn't, well, this is not necessarily a conversation that we're going to have, this is a conversation that we are going to have. So I will encourage you to ask any questions and make any comments that you may have. You don't have to wait for the end, just jump in and say it. I'm also mindful that if you don't feel comfortable the way you are, if you want to sort of bring the chairs around a bit further, by all means do that. This is just a chat among friends, really, rather than an in-conversation between two artists. Just to provide a little bit of more context, obviously we're here looking at this particular body of work, listening to trees. But I wanted to ask Jan to go back a little bit further, not right to the beginning, like, you know, not like what was the first, you know, double paint that you put on a surface, but just to go back enough to give the audience a little bit of context about what it is that we're seeing and why it is that we're seeing this now.
Thanks, Miguel. How far back? I was surprised you said that about my work before. I guess my work initially when I began, some people called it a bit of pop art, but it was really about Australian idioms and power tools and seeing the other. So it was a little bit of colour and Jasper Knight splash of paint, and I guess that's where I needed a starting point. And from that point, I've explored and travelled quite a little bit through different things, and I decided it's a bit like me not to stick to something in terms of medium. But coming to this point, well, something I never thought I'd probably do much of was art installation, and I've been doing that the last few years too, using discarded and recycled materials. And this work here too, I use discarded paint stills, which is still much part of the process in regards to sustainability and my thoughts about holistic sustainability, and also more from a societal point of view, and the big picture thinking rather than just looking at recycling plastics and things like that. And I guess that's the point I've come to, but also having reflected on all the different sort of ways to create art. For me, it's not so much about the medium, but it's more about the intent. And the intent has always been, I guess, political in a sense, because I asked myself the question, what's the point in being an artist if you can do these things, but you might as well try and do something that's actually making a difference. So these works are hopefully starting a conversation in regards to sustainability and all the different facets of it. Yeah, and in that way I have said political, but it's also about belonging to something that we see separated from ourselves, and part of that is the land, the trees, the space, the site, the context, all the interconnected variables that are very hard to measure. And this work is, I've discovered a writer, his name's Tim Morton, and it was sort of serendipitous that I now have contact with him actually, and not much, but just a little bit, and he talks about hyper objects and how we don't understand them, but we know they're there. And to me, the environment is one of those things where we really need to get to understand it. And in the previous talk, it was interesting, there's a new term out now with artificial intelligence and virtual world of the useless class. There's going to be a useless class in a decade or less or more. And I imagine a lot of people are going to be returning to nature and start listening to trees a little bit more, especially when the economy and other things get affected. So that's where I'm at.
Thanks, Jan. As you can tell straight away, Jan's work has a lot of layers. There's a lot of ground that is covered in this particular work. So I'm going to try to sort of unpack some of those layers, not all of them. Before I do that, I think just the fact that we find ourselves in this space, we do two very different exhibitions that use different mediums. However, there is a huge sort of point of contact between them, and that is the idea of representation and the idea of representing the landscape. We heard earlier on about how through Ash's work it's talking about the landscape and how the landscape relates to the personal histories, the histories of the family, the histories of the inhabitants in that land, whether it be inhabitants that came in later on, or the inhabitants that have been with us for in this land for thousands of years. And in some regards, the idea of representation is also in Jan's work as well. But before we get to the representation, what you do in your work is that you try to develop a relationship with the natural environment. Can you tell us a little bit about the process itself that will probably give us a more of understanding about some of the metaphors that you work with? But we'll talk about the process first, and then we'll delve deeper into the metaphors.
So with this work, I guess I choose a site that seems special to me. It might be a feeling or a place or a gigantic mother tree, which is another thing we can talk about. And with that, I guess there's a rich history, maybe just in the name of the work itself, but also the national park I might go to. You know, I don't always understand the history. I do try and look at it a little bit. It's in the work. But really it's about developing that relationship to that space. So when I say listening to trees, the trees are only part of the space. Which is really an interesting sort of dynamic in the sense it's the wind, it's gravity, it's all these variables, passerbys, such as the flora and fauna. Flora falls into the work, you know, magpies and galahs and all sorts of things come out during the day. So the process is I scout a place and I enjoy it, and then I'll get all my paints, discarded paints on another day, I'll plan it, and whatever materials I need. Very careful not to damage or touch the environment in that respect, but there's sort of a symbiotic relationship there. And what I do, I guess, is I use the kinetic energy to make the works, and it's a collaboration. So with this painting behind us, probably looking at 20 to, I don't know, 30, 40 litres of paint, which is dropped or splattered. It's a collaboration, and it's all synthetic polymer, acrylic paints, and it does sometimes take months to dry. And but it's usually touch dried, and I can put it back in my vehicle, and once I've finished and wait for it to dry. There's a drying process, so sometimes it actually takes months to do. I've got material actually from a year or two still to get to, because I actually love the experience more than the making. But we'll get onto that as well in terms of metaphors.
So the practicality of it. Let's talk about the practicality of the making. How
Okay.
you scout the site, then what happens?
So what I'll do is I'll find a branch. I actually use a saline bag or a blood bag I like, because people go, what? And for me that's a metaphor anyway. But the thing about my work is it's constantly changing and being experimental, so I might actually change it up and do other things, but generally I'll drip paint from branches and trees. The winds will make patterns from the drips onto the works. I'll also collaborate with the environment, so I treat the environment very much personified in a lot of ways, and from that we may get some natural patterns, some wind patterns, some other things. The textures of the paint's a little different, and the wind acts differently. The environment has actually a temperament at times, and all of that goes into the work. And when you actually look at the little pixels or tessellated parts, you'll see that there's actually sort of different stories in that, in terms of the time it took, the splatter that was made. It's much like the environment's doing an action painting with me in that collaboration. So the crux of that for me is it's mark-making communication, and whether or not you can understand the environment as a being or something, it's still a communication and a collaboration in marks. And if it was charcoal or something else, you go, oh yeah, but it's not language. I very much see this as a language. I might not understand it completely, but yeah, it's definitely a collaboration, and that's how it starts. And do you want me to go on a little bit more?
Yeah.
About it? I guess over time, what I do, and I guess I'm crossing boundaries with the metaphor, is as an aspect of the human condition, I disrupt that communication by cutting it up. It's much like we do, as the human beings do, to change the environment to suit ourselves. So I've actually changed the natural patterns to suit myself. And that's the crux of this sort of work. And that's why you'll find also the disruption in patterns in the drawings. The drawings are made with a range of different inks on strings and other things, and then I'll disrupt those patterns too. And sometimes I might not. It just depends how I feel. If you're looking at the work over there or the work over there, I see that the different pages that I've used is a disruption as well, even though it might look as one work. So you've got divisions in regards to that. When people come and see the works, actually someone just said, oh, when I saw that work, I thought it was like this big. People have a concept of how big it is, and they come and go, oh, it's actually quite small. But say that work over there, it's like a group of two. If you actually have a look at the catalogue there, I've got a work in a show at the Quarry Gallery, which is going to Caro, and it's very similar to the one on the wall. And that in itself took 2 weeks. So there's a lot of time invested, and there's also some, I guess, some ironbark sap or some sort of sap on that as well.
So you've started to touch on metaphors in some regards. I think we need to unpack the relationship and the codependency in some regards a little bit more. I mean, at the end of the day, we need the trees, but the trees don't need us. You know, we could be gone tomorrow and they will continue to live, but if the trees were to go tomorrow, we will stop living. And it's that interconnectedness that you try to highlight in your work in a very subtle way. Unless there is entry points through the kind of conversations that we're having now, or if you take the time to read about your work, the work itself can be seen as a conceptual, abstract painting of a landscape, but the process itself for you is quite meaningful in developing that metaphor, but in developing that interconnectedness. And when we've spoken about it, I think last time we spoke about it, we were speaking about it for about an hour before I had to say, okay, let's just talk about something else for a little while, because you can talk about it for a long time. But let's just quickly, well, not quickly, let's unpack that a little bit further, because that interrelationship between you as the artist and the environment in which you allow the performative aspect of the painting to develop, it's an important one.
I don't like to do things in halves usually, and when you mention performative, I guess the act of the painting in the day, however long it takes, is performative in its own respect. But I like to also look a little bit as more conceptually as sort of art traditions. So I think the work raises a bit of a question in terms of if it's a performance, is it a process painting, is this just the final artifact of a couple of months or a year? You'll notice that some of those drawings actually from 2019 to 23, even 24, because that's how long it took me to get my act together, put a signature or a frame on it or finish it. Again, it's because the process I just enjoy so much. Yeah, and I guess also whether it's an abstract work or is it actually realistic, and how do you see it? There's all those sort of conceptions to it. I'm very much, when you were talking, I was thinking very much about, it's about altering your perspective and how you see things. Like most art, tries to do. Ash is the same in a lot of ways, and he uses a lot of memory in that work. It's fantastic, and again, I might play a little bit on that perspective. I also, because of our contemporary times with the camera, which has influenced culture and a whole range of things, I very much also see this through pixelated eyes. The idea of the filter, which was a previous body of the work as well. And I see it as tessellation, but I play even within the picture a little bit, because if anyone knows how to draw a landscape or sort of foreshortening and things like that, you might see a horizon line in the work behind me. If you step back further from the abstract work, you actually might begin to see a landscape. And it's a landscape artifact of the landscape collaborating with me, doing plein air painting, making a landscape. Try and unravel that.
And then to add to that, obviously, then we get into the point of representation. So the first stage of the work happens plein air, in a collaboration with the landscape. The second stage of the work happens in your studio, through memory and through perhaps photographs that you use as reference material. But then that's when you start to compose the image as a landscape work itself that is grounded on a particular place. Because when I first looked at the works, I didn't understand that they were part of a particular place. When you explained to me that place, that's the place, and that's important to you. It's important to you to ground the work back in the place where it was made, but to represent it in your own sort of pictorial language. Yeah. And that's where, in some regards, more the metaphor, particularly about the idea of representation, comes into place. And I'm just going to touch on it now, but before we go into epistemological anarchism, which we could be here for a while with, let's just talk more about the idea of representation, because representation has been in your work for a long time.
It's not easy to answer. Look, I think abstract work allows you to enter in another world, and it's sort of a gateway. If you want to understand it, you will begin to understand it. And I guess that when there's a story attached in some respect, you'll delve deeper into it. Maybe the next exhibition, I actually have a plan to mix up some probably romantic figurative work or representational figurative work with the landscape, but we'll get onto that another time. I guess, my work, I don't think a lot of artists like to be pigeonholed into things, and I have this self-sabotaging aspect to the way I do things. If I get pigeonholed, I'll just might change a different direction, and I'm not going to do that in the future, because I really do believe in the aspects of trying to create discussions for the future with these sorts of works. I'm not sure if I've answered it. I don't necessarily see representational work as, there's different degrees of representation. You can have a landscape that is almost sort of realistic, but still representational. And where does the line or the grayness in between that, enter? It's about classification, and that's something I can't handle. Yeah.
But you started to touch on the disruption. You've mentioned the idea of disrupt a couple of times, which is fundamental in your work. And you introduced me to this particular body of work, which is, and I'm probably going to mispronounce it, you're probably going to do a better job than me, Feyerabend's epistemological anarchism, which is an understanding of science as a body of knowledge. Correct me if I'm wrong, you're probably better at this than I am. It is an understanding of science as a body of knowledge that requires that you abandon all the givens in order to be able to uncover all the truths. And in some regards, your practice does that. In that once you get comfortable with a particular medium, with a particular aesthetic, with a particular trajectory, you abandon that and you disrupt that. So the idea of the disruptive as a way to get to a point of understanding or a point of truth or to a point where you wouldn't otherwise get to, it's part of the process, in my understanding. So without going way too much, depth, let's just talk more about how that influences not just this particular body of work, but your practice in general.
So when I was told I might have an exhibition, it made me reflect, and I think I might have said this earlier last week, but when I was doing my Bachelor of Arts and Psychology and Political Science, I came across, I just love history and philosophy of anything really, but in psychology particularly, but there was this guy named Paul Feyerabend who I recognised when I was having this show how much of an impact that idea had with me, and it's I guess his paper Against Method is this way where we learn new things, not necessarily by old ways of seeing and believing, but by sort of magical accidents, or any abstract pain will go, oh, I just did this and my God, I didn't expect that and I love it, I'm keeping it. And it's a little bit like that. So someone said to me, I thought it was a bizarre question because for me it's not. What made you go into the bush and do this? What made you? And I had never even thought about it. It just didn't even occur to me that might be unusual for people. And I guess that in a nutshell is what I'm saying. I muck around with the phone and I create these amazing things that are almost by accident. I think, oh, that's going to be a great work. Or, Miguel knows, I don't know if I should probably say this so much, but anyway, I'm a little bit of a cheapskate when it comes to paying for data. So I am just now up to my 21st Gmail. Seriously, 21st Gmail with 15 gigs free of stuff that I might go back to.
I've just found out something else that we have in common. We're both cheapskates. Because I always go for the free version first. And when I can't use it any further, then I might consider paying for the paid version. But I've never created a second account, so I might have to take that on. Now, I think this is a good point to sort of open it to everybody and have more of a general discussion. Questions, comments, feedbacks, anything pops into your mind right now? Hate it, love it?
Yeah, all good.
All good. Jason.
Jan, you mentioned listening to trees and leaves. What are they saying to you with your work? But what do they say to you outside of your work? Like if they had a message for us stupid humans.
Wow. I guess something I didn't talk so much about is that meditative sort of experience when I'm out in the bush. And it might just be like, for some people, there's a phrase, watching the grass grow. And that's what I'm sort of doing as well, except I'm watching butterflies come past and noises that I've heard before but are becoming more familiar. And listening to the trees is really about listening to the space. It just happens to be that I love ginormous trees and the shade that they give, and they're living. And I guess I mentioned it once before, is this aspect of time. I might spend 6 hours, 8 hours. It just depends on the weather and the whole range of different things. And I still have to experiment with wet weather, and I've been thinking about the beach and how I might do that. But trees do actually make sounds. I mean, there's a lot of experimentation going on too with, stethoscopes coming to trees and how they make noises. There's a whole range of sort of art out there in regards to that too. and how they move. There are actually trees that can actually move, and there's so much that we don't know. I'm not going to go on a tangent, but when I'm out there, I often think about the quantum level of things like photosynthesis and how a leaf is so able to absorb light. And humans can only get solar panels that go like 30%. And there's these interesting things, tunneling and a whole range of different concepts that you can sort of bring in. The leaves themselves, I think when I was doing the show and I was thinking about titles for works, it gives me an experience when I'm there, but philosophically too, when I'm back in the studio, I'm concentrating. There's something really nice about just hand sanding, pieces I've cut up, which is this, and it's still meditative. Thinking about the experience. Now, I'm not always thinking about the trees and the leaves when I'm making it. I'm thinking about a whole range of things. And it's about sharing, I guess, and belonging. So something, this work here, which is actually one of my favourites, it's called, it's a bit of a pun really, but it's branching into the mesh. And this idea of the mesh is that if you're inside a mesh, there's no real beginning or end that you can think of. And for me, that's like humans have always separated themselves, much like, First Peoples, opposites of First Peoples' relationship to the land, where they feel they're part of the land. And it's very much that aspect that you become part of that experience in the land. And from that comes out respect and a whole range of sort of emotional responses. And that's what I would see, is that the idea of the works, it's about perspective and whether or not someone can cross that threshold into something else. I've actually, and because it was mentioned before too, a lot of people don't know this, but I've been a youth worker for 30 years. Currently, a couple of the kids I work for, it's another passion of mine. I've get offered positions and management positions, a whole range of things, and they can't really control me. And so I'm still on the ground as a youth worker, even this week. And currently we have a young Indigenous girl and another one who thought he was Indigenous for most of his life, but it's Cook Island as well. And when in my 20s, I travelled with another fellow who's actually here and saw a little bit of Australia. And that sort of relationship to the land has certainly been there for me for most of my life. Even though growing up in schools and other things, you're separated from that. Just like we are separated from a relationship. We like the trees, but we don't have a relationship with them. And the idea of a mother tree, is something you should look up. And the wood wide web is really interesting in how to talk. How trees, especially mother trees, can talk to each other using, it's like it's like a chemical Morse code that they give each other. They share sugars, they share a whole range of things. They're actually intelligent beings, maybe, but there's certainly that aspect.
Yeah. Before we keep going with that one, I think
did you hear the story on the news this week about somewhere in Camaray that somebody has chopped down the trees of a house that they rented, or I don't think they might have even owned, but they had not consulted with the local powers that be about whether it was okay to chop these trees down, and nobody is willing to admit to any knowledge of these trees being taken down. I thought it was fascinating because now we've got internal fights about whether a tree has the right to stay where it is or whether we have the power to take it down.
I mean, again, there's lots of interesting questions in regards to that. I would call myself a middle of the road greenie because I like to step back from it. I think protests are protests are useful, but at this day and age, there's so much countering that they're almost sometimes ineffective. Not necessarily so. If they're big, they're great. If they're smaller, it's harder. I guess my work is a bit of a protest in the sense that I'm trying to create a node where people might actually have discussions about it, look at the writing, you know, and do it that way. Trying to use the system to help the system. Yeah, with trees, it comes to that question as well for me. Again, middle of the road really, because what's natural and what's not natural. It's perfectly natural for human beings to create buildings and do those sorts of things, but we have to be mindful. So the whole aspect is how do we become more mindful and live, you know, together. And I had this work, which is not part of the show, but a few years ago, where it was just gum leaves on the wall and hung by string, ironically, I guess, with magnets. And it was called Only Take What You Want. And I guess fundamental aspect, which is ingrained in me in terms of Aboriginal cultures and say Western cultures, I don't like the idea of white culture. I think it's bigger than that. It's not. It's an attitude, and is that, you know, as an example, a First Peoples person might just go find 10 yams somewhere and go, oh, okay, that's great. I might need 5 of those, so I'll leave 5 in there, and then we'll feed the family, and then next time I come back this way, it'll be another 10 or 12. Except Western culture sort of goes, oh, there's 10 yams, all right, I'm going to take all of them out. Are there any more? And oh, gee, I don't need 3 now, so I'm going to throw them in the ocean. And that fundamental aspect is something that we've got to come to terms with. So I'm getting a bit political now, but
It is political.
yeah.
I mean, I have another. Oh, sorry.
I do have a question for you. My favourite work here is that big piece behind you. You've named it Eden, and I wanted a little bit more of an interpretation and I want to give the background. So I can see so much of a native bush block in there because I actually own one with a scar tree because Indigenous people have come onto my site and they've told me my site is actually sacred with lots of historical perspective. And all I've done is plant hundreds of native flowers and trees. So I want you to teach me how to interpret that painting. I can see it, but you've got little patches of these whites and blues and leaves. So I just want more of when you created it, how and why each of those becomes Eden.
Well, Eden is an interesting concept, and so I shout out to an art competition called Eden Unearthed, which this was actually in, and they actually paid me a stipend to create it, which was lovely. This work, you've got the Eden, Garden of Earthly Delights, you've got religious texts that talk about that. It's all sort of involved in it, and when I write about it, or eventually when some people read it, maybe it's just one aspect of the work. It's not all of it, but the whole work is about perception, because the whites. When I was doing psychology, there's a branch about perception and how the eye works and how it perceives things. And the further you stay away, you go away from this painting, the whites actually will trigger the idea of housing in the landscape. So when you're up close to it, or too close to it, it's just abstract. If you're up really close to it, it looks like a pixel or a Tesla. So there's all these different sort of metaphors in the work for me. But again, the further you step away and see the big picture, it becomes something else. And so it's partly we need to step away from the big picture, step into the big picture and away from things that are too close. I mean, you look at big oil and sustainability. I mean, not many people know, but a lot of the plastic is made from oil. So the longer the plastic industry stays, the more profits are going to be earned. You can make it different ways through cellulose and other things. I'll probably diverge too much talking more about it. But for me, it also is about landscape because I think I mentioned it before in terms of foreshortening and how it comes up. Even the pixels are bigger at the bottom up to that mark for the horizon line. When it comes to sort of trees, I'm not sure about your tree, but it's nice that I hear that you value it, and certainly other people value it. And if that comes in, I mean, in geography of a place, if it's a sacred place. For me personally, that raises a whole sort of massive sort of subject in terms of diaspora for people being I've got a better word, white fella. People overlook my history in a way because there's a diaspora there because my parents are Dutch, but also the Dutch weren't the nicest in the last century or two, as well, same as the English, etc. But again, it comes down what's natural and what's not natural, and anyway, I don't want to get stuck in there because it'll be land rights yet. I'm going to get on. I'll ask another question.
We sort of have to wrap up relatively soon. Simon did advertise 4 o'clock and we're at 4:20. But just before we do, Simon, I just want to put it back to the floor. Any comments, questions, remarks?
Yeah, this is what we're doing about your working process. Are you always true to the motive? For example, these 2 works here. So that's one area, one tree. This is another tree. When you get them back to the studio, when you cut them up, do you ever say, well, in that work, those 10 pieces would enhance that composition? You don't have to tell me.
I will. No.
Yeah.
I often don't know what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of having sort of an anarchic sort of, sort of empiricism behind the work, is that I'm actually not sure what will come out. This was sort of an experiment, but a lot of people see that as different things. I started with landscape because I love the irony of it as well, like making a landscape with a landscape. But branching into the mesh, a lot of people see that as an aerial view of something, or some people see branches in it because it's brown, like different signifiers trigger different things. Something I do want to mention though is this aspect of knowing or not knowing, like the environment and time. It's hard for us to actually relate to, say, a 4,000-year-old tree, because we don't, we relate to maybe 100 years, 80 years. And there's a lot of time in this work too, and I've mentioned it probably not today, but if you look at the sort of black dots made by inks in some of the drawings, and you look at say 2 centimeters worth of it, the cream shapes in this last work here are actually magnified dots, to scale of the shapes that happen on the work, the paperwork. And so I've sort of used a range of processes to see that. And for me, that actually indicates, and those drawings indicate time, the aspect of time, because the bigger the blot, the longer it stayed, and then it flicked off. And some interesting patterns come out that you recognise in your own worlds that you wouldn't necessarily see in those small worlds. It's like there's life within life as well. Like even your microbiome has life that you're not in control of with inside of you. So where does it end? But we do know that it's separate, and we're trying not to make it so. And until we really care about the environment that way, it's not going to actually. If we can make it belong to us and we belong to it, I think you'll see more mindfulness come out of it. So.
I have one final question. So over the years, that I've known you, the way that you articulate your relationship to the land has shifted. And it sort of has shifted along the same time that you were actually creating this body of work. So has creating this body of work changed your relationship or your understanding of your relationship to the land? Or has mainly changed your articulation of your relationship to the land?
I wouldn't say it's changed my relationship to the land. I've always had a reasonably good understanding of, Australian history, but also history. As a child, I used to have my veggie patch, and I used to just wonder about how do these cucumbers grow? From that little seed, and even in youth work, I plant snow peas with the young people, and the gift of life is just amazing. I think you can never stop wondering about that. I think as we get older, or as a tree gets bigger, we seem to also care a little bit less about it because we see ourselves as separate. That's why I really value, I have 4 girls, but I also really value women in a way that this could be completely wrong and I'll get scarred for it, but women's biologies keep them, in a sense, connected to life. You know, where men don't necessarily have the same issues or patterns, and we pretend we're separate more.
Before we start talking about something that I have no idea about, I might just end it there. Join me to thank Jan for providing such a insightful entries into his work, and for putting for putting this together. Thank you to Simon and to Asher and Jason.
Thank you for a very interesting talk. I think we all should listen to the trees more after this. So I'd like to put your hand together again for Miguel and Jan. Thank you. Feel free to